Hello, welcome to our webinar about immigrant detention pastoral ministry. I'm Ashley Feasley. I work at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops in Migration and Refugee Services, and I will be one of your speakers today. And we also have another speaker who will be speaking with me today about this topic.
Good morning, Ashley. I don't know if I'm the one that's supposed to speak next.
You can.
I'm Ophelia de los Santos, and I coordinate and direct jail ministry for the Diocese of Brownsville down here in South Texas. And we are the epicenter for immigration at this moment. And it's very exciting down here and very challenging. And I'm willing to answer whatever questions you all might have and give you a brief overview of our perspective on this issue.
So today we're going to discuss a little bit about the immigrant detention facility and system itself, its purpose and how it came to be. I'm going to give a little bit of that overview, and then I'm going to turn it over to my co-presenter Ophelia, who's going to talk about the actual pastoral ministry work. So I have a couple slides, and what we're going to do is just talk a little bit about the system that it exists in the United States, how it fits into our existing laws, what the needs are for those who are in immigrant detention, and then Ophelia is going to talk about her on-the-ground work and ministry, and the wonderful example of the Diocese of Brownsville. So first I'm going to open up by talking about the purposes of detention. I think it's an important thing to discuss and understand where exactly this system came from, what its stated purpose is, and sometimes what its consequences are. So immigrant detention has been used since the late 1990s, but has been used in greater frequency in the United States since about 2001 to ensure appearance of immigration proceedings. The stated purpose of why the U.S. federal government went to using immigrant detention was to ensure that those individuals who were apprehended by then INS or now Department of Homeland Security officials would show up for their court proceedings. The idea here was we wanted people to show up for what their obligations were and ensure that they were complying. The other stated purpose was to ensure that immigrants who had been picked up and who had been seen as moving forward in terms of absconding from the community, that they would be also held responsible and in compliance. The third stated purpose was to protect the community from security threats. This is something that I think is up for debate as to the criminality of the individuals who are considered eligible for immigrant detention under the INA, the Immigration and Nationality Act. We know that there are some individuals who are currently in immigrant detention who perhaps are violent or are criminals in the sense that they have been convicted of a felony. But overall, the large number of people who are in our immigrant detention facilities are not criminals. They're civil law infraction violators. They are in immigrant detention because they have violated an unlawful entry or re-entry. The fourth purpose, and this is, I think, a debate that is open, that we've seen under the Obama administration and we're seeing now under the Trump administration, is whether detention in the immigrant context was used to deter migration, to prevent those who are attempting to migrate from coming. And this is, I think, more, notice I have a question mark, it is more of an open-ended issue. There are some people that believe that immigrant detention, because of the nature with which people are held could be a deterrence. Other people believe that it is not really a deterrent, but so much as just the manifestation of our existing laws. I have a quote here from Pope Francis when he spoke to the national audience of Italian prison chaplains in 2013. He has spoken, I think, very prophetically about immigrants and refugees, but has also talked about the isolation that those who are in incarcerated situations, of which immigrant detention could be considered, what they face. And I think that we are going to discuss a little bit about that today. So now that we've talked a little bit about the facial reasons why our government is using immigrant detention, we're going to talk a little bit about the scope of the immigration enforcement and immigrant detention system in the United States. I have a couple statistics here that are used to demonstrate the growth of immigrant detention in the United States system since about that 2001 timeframe. So if you'll look at the second bullet on this slide, in fiscal year 2001, 204,000, roughly 500 people were detained in immigrant detention. If you look in fiscal year 2014, the third bullet, 425,000, roughly 700 people were detained. Currently, we are operating at a higher number than what you see for fiscal year 2014. We estimate that there could be as many as 515,000 people in some form of immigrant detention. This growth, it's really important to understand that regardless of the political, regardless of who's president, regardless of what immigration policies are put forward, these are still large numbers of people who are being detained every night in a restricted, confined circumstance in normally very remote placement areas, okay? So we're still, it's important to understand the increases here. They have increased both under, Republican and Democrat administrations alike, as you can see. Just to think a little bit, about, we've talked a little bit about the human cost that immigrant detention has, and Ophelia is going to talk about this, but I do want to pivot to talk for a second about the actual financial cost of maintaining this system and what it means for the U.S. taxpayer as well. So ICE, the Immigration Customs Enforcement, is the enforcement office of the Department of Homeland Security. They are responsible for overseeing the immigrant detention system. ICE's spending has grown over 85% in that 15-year period that we're discussing, from $3.3 billion to $6.1 billion today. We actually are expecting an even larger increase here in Washington for immigrant detention here with the next budget cycle. And matter of fact, part of the shutdown that we all experienced in December of 2018, January and February of 2019 had to do with the very funding for immigrant detention beds. So we will continue to see the cost, both in human terms and also in terms of financial terms, to continue on the immigrant detention issue. It shows no space of abating. The last factor that I think is really important to understand is that this is a private for-profit system. Even though the federal government is the administrator of the immigrant detention system, as they are the sovereign power who administers immigration enforcement, increasingly the Department of Homeland Security is reliant on for-profit contractors to maintain immigrant detention facilities throughout the country in a variety of different contractual obligations and arrangements. We estimate at this time approximately 73% of the immigrant detention system in the United States is operated by for-profit contractors. This is, I think, a somewhat disturbing trend, not only for the cost in terms of as it relates to transparency for the U.S. taxpayer, but it's also a disturbing trend when we think about oversight and the promulgation of standards as it relates to health and welfare for the detainees. When facilities go private, they have different regulations that they're subject to that are less stringent than a federally run and operated facility. And it does bear some, I think, parallels to what we have seen over the years in our American criminal justice system as it relates to the administration of prisons for U.S. citizens, those who've been detained as U.S. citizens. So we're going to go to the next slide, and we're going to talk a little bit about who exactly is detained in immigrant detention. So we have 5 buckets of people who are traditionally detained. They are detained either expressly under the INA, the Immigration and Nationality Act, or they are detained at the discretion of the Department of Homeland Security. One is recent asylum seekers. Currently, this administration is working to ensure that actually there's less discretion about detaining asylum seekers. So we're seeing more asylum seekers who perhaps pass their initial credible fear or their initial interview in their asylum process who are being detained at the discretion of the federal government. The next population that we're seeing who is being detained are long-term permanent residents who've had some contact with the criminal justice system. So who am I talking about? Well, we're talking about some of the families who are living in the interior of the United States. Perhaps they have been living here for 15 or 20 years. Dad is undocumented. He came in without authorization 15 years ago. Mom has found some sort of legal status, and then the 2 children, one is a DACA recipient and one is a U.S. citizen because they were born here. Dad perhaps has a run-in with the law. Dad perhaps gets a traffic ticket, or perhaps Dad is put in a situation where he, encounters law enforcement at a driving check stop. Perhaps Dad has an order of removal that has been, he's got an old outstanding order of removal. So this is another population, and we've seen stories about this population. They have long experienced on some unfortunate kind of effects of the immigrant detention system, both under this administration and in the prior administration, who also picked up a record number of long-term residents who've had some contact with the criminal justice system. Normally, these individuals live in the interior. They have lived in the interior of the United States for many years, and they find themselves with an encounter with either local law enforcement who has an information sharing or detainer relationship with the Department of Homeland Security, or they themselves are encountered by the Department of Homeland Security and they are put into our immigrant detention system. The middle category are some of the families that we've seen recently arrive from Central America. Families are a special case as it relates to the immigrant detention system. There are only a specific number of facilities that can detain them. It's a smaller subset, and the big facilities are located in Texas and one's in Philadelphia. And so we'll talk about that in a minute. And then the last 2 are visa overstayers and the undocumented. These are individuals who perhaps came to the United States legally with a visa, overstayed, and were discovered either by the Department of Homeland Security or by local law enforcement, as well as the general undocumented population that is encountered by law enforcement. I think it's very important, I've listed the immigration circumstances with which some of these people are detained, but we have to remember that they are people who are here, who have been, living here in some instances for many years. And so it is an important element to understand why exactly they may be detained under our laws, but also remember their human dignity. So next we're going to talk a little bit about issues with immigrant detention facilities as it relates to social and due process concerns. Ophelia is going to talk a little bit about the ministry and the needs, but I do just want to talk a little bit about some of the things that we have seen consistently over the years as concerns for those who are in the immigrant detention facilities. One is this pervasive sense of uncertainty about what is happening and the length of detention. People who find themselves in immigrant detention find themselves at an information deficit, okay? A lot of these facilities are remote. They don't have necessarily access to services like legal services or the ability to call or contact their family or visit their family to the frequency with which they're used to. And they don't know a lot about what is happening in their case, sometimes even if they have an attorney. Immigration law is very complex. It's very difficult to secure legal representation. There is no federally mandated right to free representation for immigrants in detention, so it is paid for by the family or the individual in detention. And then candidly, there's a lot of need to put together an immigration case, collect information, and appointments to appear before a judge that can be quite confusing and create a lot of uncertainty. So that's one of the things we always hear is how uncertain people feel, the anxiety that they feel, the unknown about what's going to happen with their proceedings. The other two categories that we hear quite a bit about are consistent complaints about basic conditions, so the facilities themselves, and then the pervasive due process problems. The conditions, I think that it needs to be pointed out that these are institutional facilities that are housing people in a pseudo-criminal justice complex. There can be issues with accessing language. Language is not readily available for every population that may be in an immigrant detention facility, understanding the large number of people who come in and out of the facility. Medical care has been known to be inadequate. We've seen a spike of deaths in immigrant detention in the last 18 months. Sexual and physical assault is known to happen, as well as we have seen instances of solitary confinement as a result of behavioral infractions. These are conditions that I think vary depending on the facility. If you are interested in learning more about these, you can contact me and I will send you some of the reporting that ICE does on its own immigrant detention facility monitoring trips, as well as other groups. The other big bucket of concern that we see, and it has to go really with that first one about uncertainty about what's happening, is due process issues. Simply put, it's very, very difficult for a lot of individuals who are in immigrant detention to adequately represent themselves and their interests before an immigration court, in part due to some of the remoteness of the facilities, the fact that they do not have a right to an attorney, and then it can be very difficult and expensive for someone to access that type of help. These are all factors that we see from a policy side, but we know that they lead to an emotional toll on the individual and a vulnerability that can be hard to overcome. So we're going to turn very quickly to talk about, I mentioned families that are detained, and I just wanted to explain very carefully about the families. Families, again, are detained in a separate set of immigration detention facilities. There are 3 existing facilities. One is in the Philadelphia area, and then 2 are in Texas. One is in Karnes City, and then one is in Dilley. These are the only facilities that are licensed, well, they're not licensed, but they're the only facilities that at this time that are permitted to house family units, most notably children. There is quite a bit of litigation going on as it relates to these facilities. The bishops have spoken very forcefully, particularly about these facilities, and then Clinic, the Catholic Legal Immigration Network, actually works to provide legal services for the mothers in the facility, in the Dilley facility in Texas. Most of the women head of households are the only parents who can be detained with their children. No men head of households can be detained. Most of the women are from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. We know that this particular form of detention actually was stood up under the W administration in 2004. It was closed in 2009 by the Obama administration, and then opened up again by the Obama administration in 2014. Those facilities remain open, and they have publicly been stated as a means of deterring families for coming. They're mired in litigation right now, but we are concerned about the use of family detention, particularly for the well-being of children in these facilities. So if you want to learn more about family detention, there is a backgrounder on the Justice for Immigrants website. We have a number of materials about how you can learn more about those facilities. So I have a couple more points. One is, I've laid out a little bit about the system, and you may be wondering, in addition to hearing from Ophelia about, how can we help, improve and accompany the lives of those who are detained, what are some pragmatic policy solutions to this system? What can be done to ameliorate the system that is harmful to the U.S. taxpayer, but most notably harmful to the human dignity of the detained? So the Catholic bishops have long advocated for alternatives to detention, which are alternative forms of immigration compliance for populations that have been identified as suitable candidates to enroll into some of these programs in lieu of detention. Alternatives to detention, very much, I think we're hopeful, are the wave of the future, and they provide a viewpoint of kind of what is the best way to ensure immigration compliance in a humane manner and a tax efficient manner. They cost far less than detention, even if someone is enrolled in a case management program longer than they are actually detained. They are very effective at ensuring compliance, and they're, very much accepted in the criminal justice context, so it does provide a good use. Frequently, alternatives to detention are utilized for more vulnerable populations like families, or the asylum seekers I mentioned at the beginning, or torture or trafficking survivors who really should not be put in immigrant detention. A lot of times what happens is that they work with case managers to ensure that they will show up for their ICE check-in if they have an ankle monitor or any sort of notice to appear, that they appear before the immigration court, and that they look to be complying with all existing requirements. Currently, the discussion of ATDs is going on, here in Washington, but we have a great backgrounder on the Justice for Immigrants page on alternatives to detention if you'd like to learn more. So lastly, I just wanted to turn to a little bit of our existing Catholic social teaching on immigrant detention. We have a couple, kind of sources of the bishops speaking out about this issue here in publications and in certain USCCB letters. Most recently, we've seen that the stranger is no longer the groundbreaking 2003 pastoral letter between the Mexican and U.S. bishops mentioned the issue of immigrant detention and how it should be avoided, as have the bishops from the Domestic and Social Development Committee in their responsibility, rehabilitation, and restoration, which was their primer on crime and criminal justice. And lastly, there was a 2015 comprehensive report about immigrant detention called Unlocking Human Dignity, a Plan to Transform the U.S. Immigration Detention System, in which the bishops laid forth their vision on this issue. I'm happy to answer any sort of policy-based questions, but I do just want to continue to highlight that there are better ways to ensure immigration compliance and do so in a humane, human, dignified, focused way than our current reliance on the immigration detention system. And that while a daily act of visitation and engagement through pastoral services is vital, so is advocating for meaningful reform of our immigrant detention system for the well-being of those who are detained. So thank you.
Ashley, there are two questions that came in while you were speaking. And one was, will you be able to send your PowerPoint to the people who requested because they weren't able to see your pictures, your slides?
I'm happy to send the PowerPoint.
Okay, and the second question says, is the ICI spending now $6 billion 2014 just for immigrant detention or for all ICI expenditures?
So unfortunately, ICE, it's the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, that is just the immigrant detention related line item. It is not the entire budget of ICE. It's actually much larger.
Thank you. Do you want me to proceed then?
Yeah, thank you.
That was a good one. I received some information that I needed. So my name's Ophelia de los Santos, and I'm from Edinburgh, Texas. I'm way down here in southern border of Texas, 20 minutes away, 20 miles away from the border. I was born here. My father was a Mexican immigrant. He came from Los Herreras, Nuevo León in Mexico in 1945. Just when the Second World War was ending and they still needed laborers. He swam across illegally. He married my mom, who happened to be a citizen of Italian and Mexican descent, and they formed a life together. And thanks to his valiant decision, my sisters, my brother, and I were born here. We call ourselves first-generation Mexican Americans. And of course, the government has all kinds of different labels for us, but that's why I wanted you to know that about me, because that's why I do the work that I do. After I married another first-generation Mexican American, I had to travel to get educated further, but I always wanted to come back home because this is where this is your first place that you're nurtured. And I love the people down here, and it's a mixture of so many different populations. As I retired later on in life from my practice of law, I decided to come to the church to volunteer, and that's how it starts. The church gets you to volunteer, and pretty soon they have a job to offer you. And that's how I ended up working for Catholic Charities in 2012. In 2014, and by the way, I was hired just to run a small jail ministry program with about 80 volunteers. In 2014, though, a very interesting thing happened. We call that the 2014 surge of Central Americans that began coming across our border. And the way it happened was so interesting. It's just church in action. People were being dropped off at the bus station in McAllen. Children with their parent, usually one parent, in dire straits, hungry, dirty, without any money, and waiting for a relative in the United States to send money for their bus ticket. And they started bottling up. There were a bottleneck occurred right there at the bus station. And some ladies from their local church, Sacred Heart, saw this, and they saw the need, and they started packing the backs of their trunks in their cars with wipes and diapers and water, things like that they knew immediately would help the people. But the bottleneck grew bigger, and then the bus station got upset and called the police and get out of here, and you're creating a problem for us. So the ladies went to the local pastor, the priest, Father Tom, and he called Catholic Charities. Sister Norma called me and several of the others that work there at Catholic Charities and said, come with me. We're going to go open up a center at the Sacred Heart Parish Hall to receive these people and help them. They're on their way somewhere else They just need a little place to rest, get clean. And so she sent several people to go and buy, again, wipes, baby formula, diapers, just, little things like that. And it grew and grew and grew. And so now we're receiving as many as 500 in one night. Border Patrol will actually drop them off there. They've already been processed into the United States with a little document that is called an NTA, Notice to Appear, which means that they are being allowed in to argue their refugee status further on down the line. And most of these Central American refugees, they're not coming to stay here on our border. They're going up north. They already have someone in the United States that has saved up enough money, usually $7,000 per person, that they pay someone to make their way up all the way to our border, on bordering Mexico. And these people have been exploited in so many ways. We found out after the first few weeks that we were going to need to get more help, that this was not going to be a problem that was going to be solved overnight. We didn't know we'd still be open today in 2019. We thought the government would take care of it soon enough, but that didn't happen. And so the people began coming even in greater numbers. At some point, our 4 centers that we had for undocumented children, which the government calls unaccompanied minors, grew to 16 centers, from 4 to 16. And at that point, I separated out of Catholic Charities and became a standalone jail ministry office in order to recruit more volunteers, to find out what we needed to do to minister, because these children were just flooding our valley. And it wasn't until, I'm going to say 2016, that we got a handle on it. We got enough volunteers. And by the way, our volunteers that go and minister to children have to go through a more rigorous vetting situation. They not only have to have criminal background check, FBI background check, national background check, all kinds. And they have to have, at the beginning, they had to have all kinds of immunizations. Right now, the only immunization that they're being asked to have current is a TB, tuberculosis. My only guess is that perhaps some of these children have never been vaccinated, and it's really for their protection more than anything. So our volunteers, it costs us, the ministry, about $50 per person to get their TB test and their fingerprints done. And so that cost, of course, can become greater as the need gets greater for volunteers. But I'm very blessed to have a bishop, Bishop Daniel Flores, who will do everything he can to get us the extra money that we need. I've been blessed by a Scanlon grant every year. Catholic Home Missions also grants me money. The Kennedy Foundation have gotten 2 grants, one which was just for taking care of the volunteers. And by taking care of them is that I want to provide all the volunteers in my jail ministry office to have a missal for the year, daily reading in Spanish, because most of them are in the Spanish prisons. More of people incarcerated in the valley are Spanish speaking than any other. So I have to go to Mexico because that's the cheapest place to buy them. I myself don't. I have volunteers who do that, to get them a missal, rosary, little pamphlets, things that they can use with these children. For example, I have this Novena Bíblica al Divino Niño. I hope you can see it. It's a beautiful little booklet that the children just love. It has all kinds of prayers. And Divino Niño is a devotion that comes out of Colombia, but it's known in all the Latin American countries. It's like our infant of Prague in the Latin world. So it costs a lot of money to buy them, but I try to keep those on hand. Secondly, I go to Autumn. You all know Autumn. You are church people. And I get these little small rosaries. They come in bulk in packages like this, 100 in a package, and they're 19 cents each. I can't keep enough of them. If anyone ever wants to call me and say, how can I help, buy me these rosaries? Because the children transfer out every 4 to 5 months. It used to be 2 to 3 months. It's getting a little bit longer now, 4 to 5 months, and a new set of detainees arrive. And so it's not the same children in detention. Thank God the children are moved out pretty fast, I would say, in comparison to the adult population. And where do they go? Well, some of them, they've found someone in the United States that will sponsor them. Usually a parent is already here or a relative. And again, those children get to go further up, but only until they can go in front of an immigration judge. And that judge will ultimately decide whether they stay in this country or not. For those that have no one here, maybe they were being crossed by someone else, then they get returned to their home countries. And it's at a great cost to the government, because if they're minors, they have to be accompanied by an officer. And we've seen them. Every time we travel, we see groups of these children that are traveling to their destination, whether in the United States or to their own country. I buy the good news, but in Spanish, La Buena Nueva, and it's a very thin New Testament. They ask for Bibles, but I tell them we're going to get them New Testaments, because really in detention, this is going to be more useful to them. If they want to study the Bible later, they can get a Bible whenever they arrive where they're going. But right now, I want to get them the New Testament so that when my ministers go in there, they can at least relate to the gospel that Sunday. I know you probably have some questions. I see one up right now. From Harlan, hello. Not all immigrant detainees are literate in their own language. Any advice on how to work with them? One such individual was delighted to be given holy cards. Exactly. Holy cards are a very good way to minister. I order Virgen de Guadalupe, she's the primary, and I order San Judita, St. Jude. He's very big in the community. San Martin de Porres, also. He's like our St. Francis in the Latin world. Any Marian card, they love that. They love Marian cards. Those are expensive. So again, I go to Autumn and I try to order in bulk. And then when people call me and say, how can we help? I say, give me rosaries, give me prayer cards in Spanish, please. Okay. What else can I tell you about our ministry? We grew from 80 volunteers. I now have over 250 volunteers. Not just for the children, because we also grew the adult population volunteers group. But the people in this part of the country are very Catholic, very devoted to our Blessed Mother, and they respond. The church comes in when the government can't. And we've seen it all. We meet with Border Patrol regularly to find out what their numbers are. Just yesterday morning, I had a breakfast meeting with some officers from Border Patrol, because tomorrow we are sponsoring, the diocese is sponsoring a blue mass for all of our first responders, because we want them to know that we're here for them as well, that they are doing work that they never expected, going to Walmart to buy diapers, going to Walmart to buy baby formula, taking screaming kids and crying kids from their parents when their parents are having to go to court or whatever. These officers did not sign up for that, and they are not our enemy. They are part of our family, our mystical body of Christ. And so our Mass tomorrow is going to be very special to honor them. But the officers told me, I said, what are your numbers like, guys? And they said, 1,100 a day sometimes, 1,100 a day. And sometimes it's one or two of them, and they come across a group of 400. But these families don't run. They don't fight. They turn themselves in. You're seeing now, if those of you who can see, I call this picture brothers. These two are two little boys who ended up at our Respite Center with Sister Norma one night, and one of our deacons was there helping and got permission to take these pictures. And I take these pictures with me when I speak at parishes or anywhere that anyone invites me about what's going on with immigration. We hear so many ugly things. This is the reality for us here. These are the children that you see right now. This one is called Cookies. They get here so hungry, and we have volunteers that every night go and take a home cooked meal to these people before they go on their journey. The Respite Center is just that. It's a rest center. This is James Dean in the making. He's wearing a little black jacket and chewing on his mother's coat sleeve. These children are going on into the United States. they've been allowed a parole, kind of to speak. That's what they call it, a parole into the United States before they go in front of an immigration judge. And this is simply called Rita Moreno. She's so beautiful, this little girl, and has curly hair. And I immediately saw her and thought, this is Rita Moreno, from West Side Story. But these families are very young families. You will see this next slide, this very young and beautiful woman. She looks like she's about 15 or 16, and her little boy. And in his hand, he's holding his packet. In there will be his bus ticket, the notice to appear later, and some other instructions that they get, because they've never been on an American bus before. And it's very cold on those buses. So at the Respite Center, we give them blankets. We give them a little bag with some snacks and some maybe lunches, sandwiches, if they're going on a long trip that might take 2 or 3 days, whatever they need. And they are so grateful. They're just wonderful people. I have been there in 2014. I spent 2 months there, and I never saw a person that you would think a criminal with bad intentions. These are all just down and out people wanting to survive, wanting to live one more day, and that's why they come. Some of your questions, not all immigrant, okay, let's see. What do you recommend for qualifying to minister or volunteer? Is the qualification process the same at all? How do we get help? And if our IDC is not responsive. What does IDC stand for? Do you know, Ashley?
I do not. Can someone specify what IDC means?
I'm sure it's a detention center, maybe. ICE detention center, probably. Okay, that's a very good question.
Perhaps?
Yeah, the qualification.
Detention coordinator?
The qualification.
Immigrant detention center.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, AJ. Okay.
The qualifications are pretty much the same. You have to be, over 18 years of age. You have to be an adult. And again, each center has their own requirements, but pretty much the subcontractors down here that take care of these children follow pretty much the same rules. Some of them may be a little more stringent, like the Baptist Children and Family Center. They may require a few more things. All my volunteers have to go through PREA training, which is that training about sexual abuse of children. If they don't have it, our diocese provides Protecting God's Children training as well. So all our volunteers that go in there have to have that. They have to have, like I said, a TB test, and they have to have a criminal background check. And they have to, some of them have to pay for it themselves, or our ministry pays. And in some instances, the subcontractor, for example, Southwest Key, will pay for our volunteers. There's no cost to us with them. We have Southwest Key, which is our largest subcontractor. They have 7 centers. And then we have a Comprehensive Health Services, which is actually a military contracting firm that is new to this area. And the advantage that we have is that they've hired people that have done this work before, and we know them, and they immediately contact us and say, Mrs. de los Santos, when can you start sending ministers? And then they have to go through a training. All our ministers have to go to different trainings at different subcontracting agencies. So sometimes it gets to be pretty burdensome, especially for our priests. Our priests are only allowed maybe one time without training to go in. We have our own chaplain, but there's no way he can cover, 13 different centers. But we have some more priests coming in recently under a program that was begun by a priest named Father O'Connor in Brownsville. He's in one of our poorest parishes. In that parish, San Felipe de Jesus offers itself as a venue for those children from Southwest Key to come and spend a day there. It's a safe environment, and they need places like that to go where it's gated and they can play ball or whatever outside. And they feed them, they take them to mass, and they even did a posada at Christmas time for them. And they just go out of their way. And this is the poorest parish that does this. And Father O'Connor came up with the idea one day of getting priests to be vetted and just go in just to do one sacrament, reconciliation. And he said to me, Ophelia, you have Eucharistic ministers, extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion, and they can go in and take Jesus to them. But only a priest can do confessions, and these children need to talk to someone about what they've been through. And it is so cathartic. And the children just cry and tell the priest everything that's happened to them. And the priests get out of there crying because it's such a heavy thing that these children go through. But when it's over and they walk out, it's like a new person walks out, a big smile on their faces. And he was right. I always thought you had to have confession and then the mass right afterwards. And we're learning that no, it's a standalone sacrament. So I want as many priests as I can get to go in there, and there's hundreds and hundreds of children who will not take the Eucharist if they haven't done confession. And these children need to know from the priest that it's not their fault, that they haven't committed a sin by doing what they've done, crossed over, and things have been done to them. A lot of the girls have been raped. The little boys are talking about suicide sometimes. They have counselors at the centers, but the pain and the horror that they've been through, it needs to come out. And so that we call it Project Reconciliation. And if anyone out there does this kind of ministry, talk to your priest about that. Will you just come and hear their confession? Because it is so important for these kids. Let me get through another. We are hearing that many of these people are not Catholic. Is that the case? Most of the Central American children are Catholic. There are a few that are not, but the majority are. And sometimes we have to fight with the centers, and I say fight in a good way in this, that the center will say, oh, the children have elected, because they've set up like little student councils, have elected that they want to have a dance on Friday night. And Friday night is when we send our ministers in some instances. And so the ministers will call me and they'll say, we went to minister, but they were at the dance. And they give them a choice. Do you want to go to church? Do you want to go to the dance? Well, what would you do if you were 13, 14, 15 years old? So then I have to call the director of the center and say, okay, how can we work this out? Don't schedule at the same time as your dance activity or your, whatever fun movie activity. They're not going to come to church. Don't do that to us. And so then I have to go to the top and work my way down, and eventually we get it ironed out. And it's not a one-day occurrence. It's like every week I'm putting out a little fire here and there. But that's why I get paid the big bucks, right? from the church to do these kinds of things. I don't mind it at all, because when I'm able to iron something out like that, my ministers are happy, the children are happy, and I know that God is happy because we've done what we needed to do. Do any volunteers minister at the detention sites? If you're talking about the family detention sites, yes. I happen to know because of my colleague, Deacon Bob Liebrick in San Antonio, that they go to Delhi. I'm not sure what diocese Carnes is in, but I know that every diocese, there's 15 in Texas. We just had a meeting together, people that do what I do. They're mostly deacons. I'm one of the few lay people. We have a ministry that tries to go into every detention center. It's not always easy. It's quite challenging, but we are determined because our bishops have set the bar, and they have told us what we need to do. We have always responded as church to welcome strangers among us, and this time it's no different. And it's more acrimonious, yes, but it's not different from other times. My father faced discrimination as well, and there's not enough I can do to ever thank him for what he did and what he put up with. He was called all kinds of names. But the day that he became an American citizen, I was 10 years old. It was the proudest day of my dad's life. And he never looked back. He knew that this is what he wanted for his children. These people want the very same thing. I'm running out of things to say, only because I get emotional when I talk about this. I think I've answered all the questions that I'm seeing. Let me see. Here, George is sending me some messages.
This is Ashley. I just wanted to answer a couple more questions. As it relates to the family detention sites, The two big facilities in Texas are in the Archdiocese of San Antonio, and there's a much smaller one in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia as well. It's only 100 beds. The Archbishop Gustavo has been very active on the family detention facilities in Texas, and there's been a really extensive Catholic effort to ensure that there is pastoral access and legal service access. As I mentioned, Clinic, the Catholic Legal Immigration Network, has provided legal services for the Dilley facility. And then from 2014 into mid-2015, a Sisters of Mercy woman religious was the pastoral service provider in the Dilley facility. Since that time, there's been some shuffling back and forth, but to Ophelia's point, there is an effort to make sure that the children have access to pastoral services, particularly Catholic services. We also have seen, and Ophelia mentioned the children, the ORR, Office of Refugee Resettlement, child facilities where unaccompanied children are placed while they look for placement with their families. Catholic entities are providing pastoral access for those facilities. Ophelia mentioned her work in Brownsville, where there's a number of facilities in the diocese. And then in addition to that, we know that, for example, in some of the more emergency facilities, like in Tornillo and the El Paso Diocese, Bishop Seitz and his team provided pastoral access. Currently, Archbishop Wensky and the Archdiocese of Miami is providing some for the facility in Homestead, Florida. That being said, there's a dire need for pastoral services and visitation throughout the country. Many of these facilities are very remote. And to Ophelia's point, there's not always clear-cut access to, the sacrament or to reconciliation or to other, very important things, I think, that are just so important for those who have been, put in this position. We have some follow-up documents as it relates to how you can engage with ICE. There is a religious service access coordinator, and we are happy to help work on that as well. It is our mission to increase the presence and the availability of services for those who are detained at this time. As I mentioned, the number of people who are being detained is only going up, and the time that they're spending in detention is in fact getting longer. And so the need could not be greater, I think, on the day-to-day.
Here's another question, Ashley. Our jail forbids string rosaries. If they're county jails, yes, they don't allow rosaries many times. The prisons are different. They do allow these rosaries that I buy can be pulled apart very easily. They come apart very easily, see? Mm-hmm. And so these cannot be used as weapons by the children. In the adult facilities, different rules. Although the state of Texas, for example, for the prison, allows a certain rosary to be used, we make it here in Raymondville, one of my volunteers, and sells them to the prisons for 50 cents. I can give you that information. But the jails, county jails, don't normally allow rosaries of any kind. Kevin Connors wants to know, can you describe more about alternate detention sites? I think you just covered that, Ashley. Harlan, by the way, he says we are in Nebraska and have 15 to 30 Hispanic detainees. Marlene says, to clarify, I'm a hospital chaplain board certified. I've been a visitor to a prison inmate long-term immigrant detention center. Yes, there are exceptions. There are some children now that are spending a lot more time in detention because they can't find a guardian or a parent to take them. And Father O'Connor tells me that he notices among the children sometimes a prison mentality. They start getting despondent and they despair. And so what we do is we step up ministry in that place and then try to direct them to a counselor in the facility. Pamela says, I led a visitation program. Sometimes when immigrants in detention request the sacraments, there's no response from the local priest. We are not a Catholic group. What's the best next step for us? Whatever diocese you fall in, Pamela, and you can very easily Google it, your city, wherever you are, and find out what the diocese is. There is an office that is tasked with this, to take the sacrament. They will find a priest to go and do that, okay? A pastoral visit is something they cannot deny any inmate in the United States. It's our freedom of religion. It's sacred to us. Sharon, Carn City is no longer for families, she's saying.
This is Ashley. Just to clarify, Carnes is being converted from a family detention facility to a part-time family detention facility that will also house women. We are uncertain whether the future of Carnes will go back to a family detention facility. ICE recently has issued a request for proposals for services actually for families, even though they have removed a number of families. We do think that given that they have licensing, they don't really have licensing. Given that they have approval as it relates to the ongoing litigation, that it could return to full families. But at this time, Sharon's totally correct. It's not a full family detention facility.
Again, Sister Denise, daughter of Charity, goes to Delhi twice a week. Every diocese has someone that can be available to travel to wherever someone is requesting a sacrament. If somebody wants to sponsor a refugee family, what agency provides contact information for sponsoring? Ashley, you want to take that one?
If someone wants, first off, there's two questions. Patricia Wildman, if someone wants to sponsor a refugee family, what agency provides contact information for sponsoring and hosting refugees? So I first just want to explain that there was a question about what a refugee is versus what is an asylum seeker. So under our laws, a refugee is somebody who is fleeing persecution, who has been evaluated by the United Nations High Commissioner of Refugees and by our federal government, several different branches, and has found to be a vulnerable person seeking protection and eligible for resettlement in the United States before they have even entered the United States. They are then admitted legally as a refugee in the United States Refugee Admissions and Resettlement Program. Currently, the bishops resettle refugees through Catholic Charities network around the country. And this is one of the programs that has been hit hardest by this administration with the cuts to refugee admissions.
Okay, I want to give, sorry.
Go ahead.
We have just a couple of minutes left, but I want to give Deacon Bill Drobick this address for Deacon Bob Liebrick from San Antonio. It's DCN period BOB period LEIBRECHT at gmail.com. That's Deacon Bob Liebrick, and you can Google him at the Archdiocese of San Antonio, and he has the numbers and contacts for all the deacons that are involved in these programs and can help you in Arizona and California. If you want to sponsor a child that maybe needs to be fostered or adopted, again, like Ashley said, you have to go through the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And I want to say that we will have another webinar. This Catholic Prison Ministry Coalition is a sponsor for these ongoing webinars, and the next one is June the 4th, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The topic will be grief and bereavement in jail and prison ministry, and the presenters will be Dr. Melissa Kelly, Boston College School of Theology and Ministry, and Father George Williams, who's helping us today. He's a chaplain at San Quentin State Prison, and email notices will be sent out for registration very soon. I hope that we were able to answer a lot of your questions. If you have more, I can be reached at odelosantos, ODELOSSANTOS at cdob.org. Stands for Catholic Diocese of Brownsville, cdob.org. Thank you. Ashley?
So we have several questions left over, and I'm assuming that we will have some chance to send a follow-up email. I will be sending the slides I also am happy to answer your questions. We're trying our best to answer them now on the Q&A box. My email is Feasley, so FEASLEY @usccb.org. I'm happy to answer your questions. You can also look on the Justice for Immigrants website for general information about what is a refugee, what is an asylum seeker, where are the family detention facilities. We have a number of materials. I also urge you to sign up for the Justice for Immigrants updates. We send a bi-monthly newsletter that gives you some updates on what's going on and provides some resources. There's occasionally opportunities for advocacy or learning about other programs around the country and what they're doing on immigration as it relates to the Catholic Diocese.
One last answer to Yvette Garland. We are not able to prepare children for their sacraments because we would need permission from the parents. And secondly, our bishop insists on us having at least an 8-month timeline for RCIA with these children. So it may be different in your diocese, but thank you for that question, Yvette. And I think that we're done. 20 seconds, he says. Thank you so much, Ashley. I appreciate being on this webinar with you.
Thank you. Wonderful to see your work.
Thank you. Be safe.
Thanks.